Hey guys, my name is Flowers-Brasher. I have a master's degree in rhetoric and composition with a specialization in racism in higher education. And welcome back to the Rhetoric of Racism Week 4. I want you to settle in for a long one. We're going to move to the next slide and look at my beautiful face. That was me the last semester of my last year getting my master's degree. Aren't I so happy? So moving forward, looking at our reading list, the reading for this week was The Psychology of Racism on Very Well Health. I hope you read it. It would provide really good background for today's lesson. Now, I know I'm talking fast, but that is because I have made a video that is pretty long. And so in case you don't understand, feel free to rewind and just know that I am reading off of the slides for our visually impaired folk. So don't worry, you're not going to miss anything important. So our Class 4 overview. Our foundational statement is, a key factor in the power of racism is its ability to manipulate the mind. I think it's really important that that is our foundational statement because we have to understand that part of the power of racism is telling white people that they are better than black people and telling black people that they are inferior or worse than white people. That central idea has been used to support and push forward the rules and lies of racism for centuries. So some key takeaways. People are not born racist. Children develop racist ideas and beliefs from the environment around them. They can identify differences, but they do not determine how to judge those differences until someone or something teaches them to. A lot of parents like to say, my child doesn't see race. Yes, they do. Once a child is old enough to distinguish colors between blocks, they are old enough to tell that their friend has a different tone of skin than they do. However, that difference is neither good nor bad unless someone or something suggests it is. That's why kids usually aren't afraid of things unless that thing is drastically different than everything they already know or it causes them harm. It's part of why kids are so inquisitive even when we don't want them to be. Black, Indigenous, and people of color carry the mental weight of racism. Our optional reading for further study is Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. Moving on to our next slide. I want to discuss mental well-being in the face of racism. Some key quotes from our reading. Early explanations of racism were often inherently racist. Modern views on racism don't simply focus on individual acts of racism, but also look at how racism is perpetuated at a societal and cultural level. If you remember our week 2 lesson on what racism is in the US, then you'd understand how I talked about individual racism is powered by systemic racism. Individual racism would not have nearly the amount of impact if the system didn't support it. Our next quote, decreases in overt expressions of racial bias might suggest that racial prejudice and therefore racism is less extreme in modern America. However, many psychologists suggest that racial bias has gone underground, and they have mounted substantial evidence that it instead thrives in subtle forms. When I was getting my undergraduate degree, I called my grandfather and I asked him, I said, do you think racism is better today than it was when you were a kid? My grandfather said no, and he marched with King. He lived most of his life in Birmingham, Alabama, and he said no. In practice, saying you're colorblind in regards to race suggests that you are choosing to ignore how race has a real impact on how people are treated. It also implies that you are unwilling to consider that race-based discrimination could be the root cause of harm. Black kids are taught early on how to interact with police. For many Black parents, especially Black fathers, this is the talk they dread the most. This talk often occurs before a child has even made it to middle school. These talks often include statements like this: if you see a cop, put your hands up and don't move. Make sure they can always see your hands. If you're in your car, hold your hands in front of the steering wheel. Make sure they can always see your hands. Never ever say anything unless the officer says something to you first. Comply, comply, comply. Whatever the officer says to you, it's fine. What matters is that you get home in one piece. They can spit on you, make you kneel on the ground. Do not fight back. What matters is that you get home in one piece. Imagine hearing that as a 10-year-old. In your life, when's the last time you thought about the color of your skin? Moving on to the next slide. Now, these next couple of parts is going to be a lot of reading, and I don't want you to skip this. This is maybe one of the most important sections of this lecture. This is the impact of racism on psychology, something that is important. On the next slide is a generalization and summarization of information regarding mental health care in Black and brown peoples. There is more research that needs to be done in these areas. In addition, like any good academic, do not take these statistics and run. Use them to guide your own research. I have included the sources I have pulled from for the next slide, and they will also be available in the description. Our next slide. Facts about mental health and illness in Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Among adults who report fair or poor mental health, white adults, 50%, are more likely to say they received mental health services in the past 3 years, compared with Black, 39%, and Hispanic, 36% adults. Adults identify cost concerns and scheduling difficulties as primary barriers to mental health care, and Hispanic, Black, and Asian adults disproportionately report additional challenges, such as finding a provider who can understand their background and experiences, lack of information, or stigma or embarrassment. Many jobs held by minorities do not have time off for mental illness. Their healthcare plans may not include mental health care. This is important to consider when we think about barriers that racism may have led to. Just because it's not a direct, all therapists are racist and thus these people can't get care, doesn't mean that racism hasn't played a role. Racially minoritized children, i.e. Black and brown children, are more likely to be diagnosed with ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, than white children. Oppositional defiant disorder is a disorder that says a child is being disobedient because they like being disobedient, because they get some kind of satisfaction from being disobedient. That no matter what they do, even if they say that they don't like being disobedient, even if they believe that they don't like being disobedient, they are unable to stop. There is something innate within the child that stops them from being able to follow directions. Black discontent with enslavement was treated as a mental disorder. It was treated with whipping. Now, I want you to combine these two previous statements. Racially minoritized children being diagnosed with a disorder that says they're disobedient because they're disobedient, and Black discontent with enslavement being treated as a mental disorder. How many children do you know that have ADHD or need glasses or have autism or are depressed or anxious? Many times, children who are depressed or anxious act out. by the over-diagnosing children with a disorder that says being disobedient is their disorder. Children are missing crucial, critical care and are instead labeled as problem children. Intelligence tests were and are not designed with Black language in mind, making Black and brown children score lower overall, even if the levels were the same when language was controlled for. For example, couch versus sofa, isn't it versus isn't it. Those differences may not seem big, but to a child, they're everything. They don't necessarily have the social context to fill in the blanks. And because these tests are based on the experiences of middle class white people and based on the language of middle class white people, it disproportionately excludes Black and brown bodies and poor white people. So up next is going to be a video I recorded, and I hope everybody who watches it really learns something and better understands why we say race is such a big deal in regards to Black and mental health. About mental health, people often like to say, well, you can't say theirs is worse than mine or mine is worse than theirs. So I just want to get something out of the way. We are not saying one is worse than the other. They're just different. And that's okay. By acknowledging that things are different, we begin to acknowledge that there is a need for change. So, taking all of that into account, in this world, there are two people, and they are exactly the same. They each have a weight over their head, life. From a favorite TV show to be released to stress at work, it is exactly the same. They have the same wage, they grew up with the same rules, they were punished the exact same. In this universe, there is nothing different about these people except their race. This person is white and this person is Black, because I can speak to the Black experience, but other people of color are free to weigh in the comments for their experience. So, for this Black person, they have an extra weight, a weight called race. When we talk about race and racism's impact on mental health, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about this extra weight. Remember, everything between these two people is otherwise equal. And of course, in reality, this is not always the case. There are plenty of times where, for a white person, life is this big. It's heavy, it's stressful, it's hard to manage. For a Black person, life may be only this big. It's easy, it's relaxing, all of these things. But this Black person still has race, specifically racism, as a weight. Now, these two are clearly different sizes. So we're not saying that this Black person is having a worse life than this white person. No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that racism is something white people do not have to deal with. Racism is not something white people have to worry about. Because a white person is white, they are allowed to forget about racism. And for a lot of black people, racism is not this huge, scary thing. It's a fact of life. It's nonchalant. It just is what it is. But even as minorities, we have a tendency to undersell the impact racism actually has on us. So let's do some quick genealogy for black people. We're going to go back 4 or so generations. So we have a great-great-grandparent, a great-grandparent, a grandparent, a parent, and you. Now remember, this person is black. All of these people are black. There may be some mixing and in there, but for the most part, it's all black. So let's look back. This parent grew up post civil rights. So they grew up in a world that was, generally speaking, post Jim Crow, where color blindness was on the rise, and where it was taught that it was better to be quiet about race for safety. Now, you were taught that and thought, clearly that's not working. Racism still exists, so you're loud about race. Or maybe you're quiet, but generally speaking, this is the theme. So if we go back even further, your grandparent was Jim Crow. So they grew up in a society where being quiet about race and being loud about race didn't work. They grew up in a strict, rules-based society for safety. And they taught your parents that being quiet about race was the right thing to do because being loud got you hurt and being quiet meant you could succeed and no one would say anything as long as you stayed quiet. We get before Jim Crow and we have sharecropping. Now, sharecropping and Jim Crow, generally speaking, happened at the same time. But in what we're talking about, we're talking now about early 1900s, very late 1800s. We're still in a rules-based society, a strict rules-based society. Nothing about this has changed. The rules are just ever so slightly different. And before them, we have slavery. Everything with the rules-based society, strict, rules-based, and whims-based. Now, what do I mean by whims-based? I mean, if you breathe wrong, someone could lynch you. Now, this occurred during sharecropping, it occurred during Jim Crow, and it occurred during the post-civil rights era, and it even still occurs today It just looks different. You maybe look at a cop wrong for here. You walk into the wrong town at night here. You bump into a white girl on the street here. You save some food for your family because you don't have enough food to give to the owner of the land you're on here. And you are late to picking cotton here. Are we seeing the pattern? Are we seeing that everything is continuing between these lines? It just looks a little different. Now, is that to say we are dealing with the exact same issues as our ancestors? No, we are not slaves. But we are still dealing with racism. And because we are still dealing with racism still impacts our mental and physical well-being. In order to help ourselves heal, we have to acknowledge this truth. By acknowledging this truth, we can better advocate for our right to a healthy mind. I hope you enjoyed that recording. Our homework and reading reminder. Your homework this week is to intentionally consider how your race impacts your interactions with others and the world. Perhaps there isn't anything to notice. Maybe differences are subtle. It could be that what you remember were actually things your parents or grandparents experienced. Take the time to recognize the weight of considering race before every interaction has on you. Depending on your racial experiences in the world, how can you help yourself become more or less aware of race in your day-to-day interactions? Don't forget next week's reading, and I'll see you for week 5.